All right, so we're going to change pace now a little bit, and we're going to go over to the history of Zionism. Now, this book, I didn't really assign this book to buy, and I'm not even sure how available it is. You say, is this a good book? Well, it's good and long, and it covers the subject up to about 70 or so. When was this written? 72, a pretty good guess. Part 1 is Out of the Ghetto, Part 2 is The Forerunners, 3 is Theodor Herzl. This is the chapters. Part 2, The Unseen Question, meaning the Arab question. Then 6, Building a New Society, Left-Wing Zionism. 7, Blood and Fire, Jabotinsky and Revisionism. Then 9 is the Weitzman era, the European catastrophe, the struggle for the Jewish state is 11. So actually, we don't need all those things, but if you want a good history of Zionism, this is the best one there is. It's by Walter Laqueur. I can never spell this fellow's name. Anyway, I'm sure you can get it off, one of the booksellers online if you ever want it. And it's a good book for your library. I mean, I really do recommend it. We're not going to really do labor Zionism in this class. And we've already done Out of the Ghetto to some extent. The Forerunners we're going to do ourselves anyway here, and Herzl and everything we're going to do in detail. But, it's the whole story, so if you want to read this along with it, what should you read to keep up with where we're going to be? Well, I should have already given you an assignment, but Out of the Ghetto and the Forerunners is where you should be. We're not at Theodor Herzl yet. Maybe next time we'll get to Theodor Herzl. Now, I should give you, they actually sent me a copy here, which is really, mine's falling apart, as you see. I originally paid for this book, where is it? I can't even read it. What it looks like, I don't know, it was about maybe, $1.75 or something. And if that, and now I don't know what they get, but some absurd price. $30 they go out here. What are you going to do? I know my books are falling apart, but I don't like to take my notes and transfer them, so this is the last term I'm going to use this book, so that's cool. What I want you to read in this book, if you haven't already, is, I should have given it to you last time, but in exams, and I don't like to interrupt people's thinking and so on. Yehuda Alkali, the first person, the precursors, that's parallels to stuff we were just looking at in Laqueur. Kalischer, Hess, those are the first 3 people. Moses Hess I mentioned last time. Eliezer ben Yehuda, very important person. And look at the dates on these people. Kalischer, Kalischer 1794 to 1874, 1795. Alkali 1798 to 1878. So these are really very early thinkers in terms of this approach. And interestingly enough, as you can see, those first 2 names, at least the first one anyway, are Sephardi names. Now, I didn't really go into the parts of Rudovsky that relate to some of the other thinkers that, apart from the, Reform Judaism, historical school, and so on and so forth. I didn't really go in very deeply into some of the other people that he covers, but you might want to because it's really very interesting. For instance, he has a person that he covers, Samson Raphael Hirsch, 1808 to 1886, so he's even a little later than these people, who he labels as neo-orthodoxy. And these people are already moving backwards to retrieve orthodoxy in Central Europe, in Germany. But one of the most interesting is this Samuel Luzzatto from Italy. And I think his dates are 1725 to 1805, which is really even earlier than these ones in the Zionist material. Now he has a pretty good presentation of Luzzatto. Oh, pardon me, Luzzatto is 1800 to 1865. Pardon me. So he's a contemporary of these other fellows. So it isn't going backwards. But he does a very good presentation. I've got all my notes out of him anyway, and you know, there's no point in my reading them, what you can read yourself in that particular book. But he is very upset about the Maskilim. Maskilim were the people, that's a Hebrew word for someone who follows Haskalah. Some of you didn't understand what Haskalah was. Haskalah is the Jewish word for the Enlightenment, meaning bringing the philosophy of the Enlightenment into the Jewish community and trying to upgrade it. Something like the Muslims need to do now, which they're not going to do. So, because they threaten each other with beheadings and other kinds of things, so there's not going to be any enlightenment going on anytime soon when people are threatened with their life. So that isn't going to happen. And it's a very dangerous world, as we've said, because of people with a medieval mindset are going to have modern technology at their disposal, which is what the whole struggle we're witnessing is all about. Who wants to deal with it and who doesn't, but we've already been through that. Well, at this time, the Judaism experience of this back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, the same thing was going on, but without, you know, without basically resorting to violence and cutting people's heads off or whatever. So he's not happy about and he sees most of this reformism. He's from Italy. So if you're from, you don't know Jewish names, most of you, but if it has a German sound, it's usually what they call Ashkenazi. And if it has a kind of Spanish or Italian sound, it's usually, in Europe anyway, Sephardi. And these Sephardis got into areas like the Balkans and Italy from the expulsion from Spain, where they went to the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire had control of the Balkans, and others went to Italy because of a thing called the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, where they were able to go there anyway. So they got to Greece and the Balkans because of the Ottoman control, and Italy was, because there was a certain amount of freedom still in Italy, because the Vatican did protect Jews to some extent. There was the idea that we want to keep the despised people alive as a witness to what happens to people who abuse or kill the Son of God. So they didn't want the Jews to disappear, the Vatican. They never did. Now, evangelical people do want to convert Jews, but the Vatican didn't really want to convert Jews. They wanted to keep the idea of despised people in existence. So they weren't really mistreating them in Italy as such, and I don't even think they were particularly despised there. But they were allowed, because of the Vatican influence there, to come to Italy to some extent after the expulsion from Spain and other places. Well, you see, he is already writing about a kind of Zionism and returning to support by the toil of your hands the ancestral homeland with pride, to rehabilitate their own selves and restore the homeland to flow with milk and honey, very romantic. And, quote, farming too will then be the core of the productive economy and stimulate its growth. This is in the 1850s now that he's writing these things, 1840s. Now this is the main point here. Instead of financing immigration of Eastern Europeans to Central and Western Europe to be corrupted, and to America to be corrupted by Western civilization, egoism, atheism, etc., the effort should be reversed and focused on the land of Israel, worked by Jews, which would restore the former bloom and blossom, and also bring about a cultural revival. A homeland then would be the center for justice and righteousness, that mission to the people idea. We'll hear that again in a person's work called Ahad Aham, who I personally don't like very much, but when I don't like someone, you do hear it from me, and I apologize for that. I'm not objective. We're reading here about Luzzatto, and Rudelsky got very good material on him. That really would be his solution. Stop bringing immigration to the West. Stop bringing immigration into Germany from Eastern Europe and further in from Siberia and elsewhere. Stop sending people to America and Argentina. Go and restore the homeland to bloom, and that would redeem yourselves, and it would also upgrade the land itself, which is virtually lying in ruin and decay. So he's really a forerunner. He's attacking the Maskilim. But he's a Sephardi, and it's really interesting that the Sephardis do have never did fall for the reform idea. They still haven't. This is why there's no Reform Judaism in Israel to this day, because the Sephardi rabbis will just never allow it. You know, it just never will, it just never be. It may one day, they'll maybe make way for conservative Judaism, maybe, but they don't even recognize conservative Judaism in Israel. Only Orthodox Judaism is recognized, whether Sephardi or Ashkenazi is recognized in Israel, even to this day. And I told you about that. The reason for that is also has to do with the Ottoman Millet system. You remember I told you about the Ottoman Millet system? Sorry to keep you here on Halloween, but I appreciate your diligence for being here. Millet. What is a millet? National entity. The Ottoman Empire was based on self-governing national entity, something that we didn't realize when we went into Iraq. We still don't realize that. Well, of course, Iraq, the British didn't realize it either when they created Iraq, which is an absurd creation to begin with. But if we had any brains, we would have studied history and realized that you have millets. You have a Shiite millet, you have a Sunni millet, you have Armenian millet, you have a Jewish millet, you have a Greek Orthodox millet, and they were allowed within their own personal areas of administration, marriage, divorce, things like that, to basically control their own community, which is what you see is going on in Iraq at the moment. And there's no way to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, short of an insane butcher like Saddam Hussein, or Saddam Hussein, whatever you want to call him. My kids used to call him Saddam Hussein. So. But anyway, Saddam Hussein. You know, I'm not commenting whether it was right to remove him or not right. I think that you should, if you can do justice in the world and bring about some sort of right, that should not let people be brutalized if you can do anything to help it. But if you do stop people from being brutalized and you know, murdered and everything like that, and something should be done in Darfur, by the way, too. This is a disgrace what we're witnessing around the world, not from America. And particularly Europe is disgraceful. They do nothing ever. They did nothing during the Holocaust, and they do nothing now. And they wait for us to do something, and then they laugh and criticize us. And we're overstretched, so we can't go into Darfur. But Darfur is a genocide going on, and nobody does anything about it. The UN just plays games, and the European Union plays games, and it just goes on. And nobody has it on the front page, because the journalists don't care about it. Yeah?
This digression, where do you think Iraq will end up?
Well, I'm going to say that in a minute. I don't have any idea where it will end up, because I think the administration is learning a little bit, but I don't want to digress any further than that. I think they are beginning to learn. It's a bit late because they're going to lose the midterm election here. And they should on social issues probably lose. I'm not saying that on social issues they're anything wonderful. You see, if they had had a proper understanding, I don't think it was unjust. It's never, to me, in my mind, unjust to deal with brutal, unjust people. Someone has got to take care of the bully in the schoolyard. You know, whether you like it or not, we have the ability to do that. we've reduced our army to the point that we don't have the ability, and I think that's a shame because they don't want to, they've reduced taxes, so they don't want to spend for an army. I read in the paper that McCain wanted the regular army, not the reserves, to be increased by 100, 200,000 men or something, and women, something like that, and the Bush, Rumsfeld people resist because they're all into pinching pennies because of their tax reduction program. They don't want to, increase the regular army, and I don't want to go into all of that. But the point is that if they understood the Millet system in Iraq and they had people who understood how this place worked, I think they could have gotten a handle on it, put it that way. And that's hindsight, of course. But I was always for the deconstruction of Iraq, even back in 1991. I wrote an article that the New York Times accepted, and then for some reason the State Department got involved and made them reject it. It was called on the dismemberment of Iraq. That was what the article was before Bush 1's campaign went into existence. I had an article all written. Did get published somewhere else in a very it wasn't internet generation, so it was published where no one would see it. Ultimately, because I had to wait while the New York Times waited a month and a half. First they accepted it, and then they did it, and then I know someone from the State Department called them and asked them not to, that was against their policy or something. But the point of that article was to say, this is all nonsense, this Gulf War. If you're going to put all those troops into the Gulf, just go up to Baghdad. That would be easier than fighting in Kuwait. You just have to go up through the desert, which what they have seen is what you've seen. And then, give the Kurds their homeland, give the Shiites their homeland. It was all what I said in this article. And let the Sunnis suffer for what they've done. They don't have any oil, and let the Kurds flourish with the oil, and let the Shiites flourish. Well, of course, the Saudi Sunni sponsors of the Bush 1 campaign in Iraq were horrified by such an idea. In any case, this is what is on the Democratic table at the moment: dismember the country. Yeah, of course, that's the only way to do it is dismember the country. It's an artificial country. And the Turkish, the Ottoman Millet system is the governing way these people operated long before the British created Iraq. Give them their autonomy or whatever. The whole thing is oil. They don't want to give the Kurds oil because they don't want the Kurds to become a revolutionary force in the Middle East, because they don't want the Kurds to deconstruct Turkey and Iran, which is what would happen because there are large Kurdish minorities in eastern Turkey and Iran. So that nobody wants to give the Kurds the oil. No one wants to give the Kurds anything. And the British, I hate to use the expression, but a better one, basically screwed the Kurds. They gave them nothing in this Iraq. And we've been watching how they've been butchered and gassed and every other thing. The Shiites in the south could have been managed in an earlier period. They would have been much more grateful back then when Saddam was, beating up on them than they are now, and now that Iran has become so aggressive. So what could have worked in 1992 doesn't necessarily work in 2006, so I don't have the answer. But I said with an intelligent foresight, understanding how the country worked, you could have done it. Go back to the Millet system. So the Millet system gave all the communities the power over these internal affairs. And that, you see, when the mandate came into Palestine, it conserved the Turkish administration in the way it had been previously. The Ottoman Empire had secularized civil law. I know, because I wrote a book called Islamic Law in Mandate Palestine and Modern Israel. That was my PhD thesis. So you can get it online, I'm sure. It's published by E.J. Brill. If you want to learn about how the legal system of the Middle East, not just in Palestine, but anywhere works, that's a very good book. I wrote the first third of it so I could teach myself how it worked. And maybe I should have gotten a PhD in law from it rather than what I got. But in any event, Palestine is just a case, example in point. All the countries in the Middle East are organized the same as Ottoman successor states. So ultimately, in the 30 years of the mandate, the British mandate for Palestine, which I'll talk to you about in due course, some British law was introduced. But the main source of law was still what the Ottomans had done. They adopted the French Civil Code before all this happened for business affairs. They wanted to modernize their business structure and so on. But they left the Mallets in control of personal status, and that's still the case today. And the Muslims handle Muslim affairs in Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Lebanon, all these countries. And the Jews handle their own personal status, and the Jewish rabbis then have political parties. They're all Orthodox. There's a Sephardi group and an Ashkenazi group, and they won't let anything go forward. They won't let any government be formed that doesn't recognize their authority over these areas. And that's why there's no civil marriage in Israel, and there is no Reform Judaism or Conservative Judaism in Israel. Americans try to come and bring these things, and they all fall down. They all collapse before the strength. That's how strong these structures actually are. Any event, how do we get on that subject? What sprung that up? Yeah, well, how do we get to the Millet? Aside from the rabbis controlling, we got into the rabbis controlling marriage. Oh, conservative and Orthodox Judaism, conservative and Reform Judaism. So this reaction to the Haskalah, that's how we got it. Reaction to the Haskalah, and again, Haskalah, it means Jewish enlightenment, but enlightenment that is following Enlightenment philosophers. Rousseau, Voltaire, Hobbes, Hume, Locke, and so on. This Haskalah, Mendelssohn, took place in Central Europe among primarily Ashkenazi Jews, that is, Jews from Poland, Russian Jews coming westward, Jews mostly in Germany, less in France. Now, France would be a mixture of Sephardi and Ashkenazi. Why would France be Sephardi and Ashkenazi? I explained it to you. The refugees from Spain came up into southern France in the 1600s and so on. So the earlier communities were Sephardi. England, you know, is a mixture of Sephardi and Ashkenazi. The old Jewish families in England are, guess what? Sephardi. Disraeli is not an Ashkenazi name. You wouldn't know it. But it's a Sephardi name, Disraeli. It's even Hebrew. Montefiore, all of these sort of Latin-sounding names from English Jewry. Cesson, Siegfried Cesson, the famous war hero in England and so on, of the First World War. All those are Sephardi names. Well, where are the Ashkenazi? The Ashkenazi started coming in after this period we're talking about, Napoleon, the push westward of the Eastern European Jewry into Central Europe, America, and England. Now, there are more Ashkenazis in England than Sephardis, but there's still an old aristocracy in England of Sephardi Jewry who basically still have tremendous power in English Jewry and run the show, if you want to put it in those terms. And they came in, a lot of them at Cromwell's time. They were invited, as I told you, from Holland. And those Jews from Holland were not Eastern European Jews. They were Spanish Jews who had gone up to Holland because the Spanish emperor, I think it was Charles V, was called the Holy Roman Emperor. He had control of Holland, and there was a war fought there. If you look at some of the old paintings I told you about it, Velázquez shows one of the battle scenes in Holland of the Spanish army against the Protestant army. It's called the Peace of Jena, I think it's called. How many have seen a Velázquez painting with all the lances sticking up in the air straight up? It's a famous painting by Velázquez, who was a Spanish court painter of the 16th century. So Holland is where, you know, Spinoza, that many of you missed, he kept saying Spanish philosopher. Okay, he's originally from Spain, but he's in Holland. He's a Marrano. He's a Sephardi. I'm sure he was actually born in Holland. But that again is not a Germanic sounding name. You have to know a little German to know what sounds German and what. Now Eisenman, what's that? Pure German sounding. You know, that's, nobody would doubt that I was an Ashkenazi type person. And anyone who knew Jewish history, you know, would Ashkenazi, you know, for sure. and so on and so forth, you know, Rosenblum, Goldberg, you name it, you know, Spielberg, you know, these are all Ashkenazi names, you know. I can pick them out in a minute for you.
Bush.
Let's see, anything like Fetterman or something like that, or, but if you get a Levitical name, a Levi or something, then you can't tell. Though Levi's trousers is not the person's last name, was it? That was his first name. He was a man called what? Strauss. Levi Strauss, who came to San Francisco time of the gold rush because he was one of the itinerant merchants, saw that they needed broadcloths and gingham and things like that for doing the heavy work that was going on there, and made Levi's clothing, trousers and other types of materials. So basically, he's a dominant world presence today, that company. But it's not a Sephardi company, it's Ashkenazi. But now, see if I can think of anyone else that would, well, anyway, a name like, or any Levi name, you just can't tell whether it's Sephardi or Ashkenazi, because those are, that name is based on the original Hebrew Levitical connection. And any Cohen type name, you can't tell. Cohen has variations. Cohen, Khan, Kahana, and so on and so forth. Even a name like Katz. Do me a favor, you know, just go outside and eat your pretzels. I really appreciate it. Sure. I find it bothersome.
Find it what? I'm sorry?
Bothersome. A thing like, I think it's rude. A thing like, what was I thinking then? I said Levi, oh, Katz. That sounds German, doesn't it? Katz and John were kids, right? But Katz is really an acronym for Kohen HaTzedek. Kohen HaTzedek, righteous priest. It's an acronym for, so you can't tell if that's a Sephardi name or an Ashkenazi. So, those are, you know.
So what are some Sephardi names?
I don't really want to hear you eating that mix, okay? Do me a favor, you're a graduate student, you should have more manners. My professors would have thrown me out of the bloody building when I was in graduate school.
I can just go if you're upset.
You can stay, but don't eat your pretzels. What, do I have to have an argument with someone who's as mature and sophisticated as you, whether you should eat pretzels in a classroom when a professor is lecturing? It's really rude.
Yeah.
It's hard to take up
I was hungry, I'm sorry.
Well, so eat them outside.
I'm good, I was doing that.
I'm not trying to throw you away, so eat your pretzels outside.
Well,
Come back when
you
you're
just
ready.
seemed upset, so I thought I'd do whatever you need.
No, I'm happy to have you. I just am upset by that kind of a disrespect.
All right, my apologies that you can.
No problem. Of course it's disrespect. Maybe no one taught you what respect is. I don't think anyone ever told him that. Maybe he'll learn, maybe he won't. In any event, so Katz, Kohen HaTzedek, really interesting name, Kohen HaTzedek. Which is, the Katz comes from here. They just abbreviate that, the K and the TZ for tzedek. So, I mean, you can tell what are Eastern European names. Herzl, it's not clear. I'm not even sure Herzl is totally Ashkenazi name. It's Hungary, it comes from Hungary, which is at the edge of the Balkans. So, a name like I just told you about, Alcala here, one of the people I gave you, that's totally Sephardi. And then, so you don't get, now that doesn't mean Sephardi started the Zionist movement, though they were some of the original. Luzzatto from Italy is some of the original. You see his idea is he doesn't like this sending people to absorb Western ways, if you want to, you know, become corrupt and so on and so forth. And to some degree he may be correct, because maybe he had been correct. Maybe history proved him right, because You know, I wouldn't want to even begin to estimate how many Jews have left Judaism and disappeared in the West. I wouldn't even want to estimate the numbers that have melted into the Western society. Not that that's bad or good, but I'm just saying that, you know, if you care about those things, which he did, then he foresaw maybe things that were really, we're not talking about gas chambers now. That's another thing that we're going to deal with in the West, unfortunately, which Herzl is going to try to avoid. But maybe he foresaw this total assimilation. Everybody, I mean, Asians have the same problem in trying to keep their culture here. Every society has the same culture. You don't have to, by the way, give up your culture to be an American. You can hang on to your culture, but as the generations melt away, I mean, for instance, people from an Asian background try to pass on the language. It becomes, now keep it closed, you can just come on in, it's okay. Just keep it closed. It's all right. People from Chinese culture or other Asian cultures, Japanese, etc., they try to keep the language up. But they, you know, it's so difficult for the children in an American environment, so maybe one generation can get it at home, but by the second generation, I think it's really difficult. So a lot of the communities send their kids for the weekends to weekend schools, and that's very painful for them. I'm not sure it really is something that they appreciate in the end, doing, the young people. So it's a burden. Of course, the Asian immigrants to America at the present time, because of these vigorous efforts on the part of their communities to try to retain something, they did flourish in America. So the community effort to try to impart these values in education, in fact, helps them in some unseen, manner that you can't even perceive, because they try to put the cultures that they had previously into that person in some manner, and that helps them withstand other things. I don't want to be crude or rude, but suppose you were bombarded by rap all day long, and you wanted to produce a sophisticated person in an environment like that. It would help to have some values from a culture, whatever that culture is, that you could withstand that assault. And I'm sure that someone from whether Korean or Chinese or Japanese background has that. Some will not, but others will be able to deal with that. In the Afro-American world, there's a notable difference of Afro-Americans who come here from Africa today and immigrate from Africa, and they really want to succeed. They are not seduced so much by this kind of downpulling that some of that represents. The bitterness embodied. I'm not saying it's good or bad why it happened, but the bitterness embodied in it, it's hard for young people to deal with. But if you're from the West Indies, Jamaica, places like that, you have the British sort of a cultural strain that's been indoctrinated into you before you come here. I mean, you're much more inoculated to that kind of thing than someone who just is born in the environment here. So a cultural strain from a background is a tremendous help, whatever that culture is, whatever produces, in order to give the child or the offspring backbone. It's really important. Okay, so this is what Luzzatto was saying about the Jews. Maybe going west wasn't a good thing. Isn't a good thing for them. Maybe they should put their energies into this other endeavor. And this is what Herzl will pick up in his thought. This is exactly what Herzl will document. Maybe it's 100 years later. If that, maybe it's 60 years later. And I think Herzl's father had already encountered some of these people, and we will encounter it ourselves. Okay, now, before we go on so from now on in to the end of the term, we're going to deal with these different Zionist thinkers. You say, well, it's all the same thing. What have we got to deal with? No, it isn't all the same thing. And the problems were, now you say, why don't you go on with the Jewish thing? Well, there's no real development in America of these things. I mean, we get it all grown already from what you saw from these various thinkers in Europe. And basically that's where American Judaism is. And either they're losing people through assimilation, or they're surviving in the forms that we have already studied. So we don't really have to deal with any more of that. And I don't think the wave of the future is on the side of American and European Jewry. American Jewry is fairly strong still. European Jewry was eradicated to a large extent. Literally eradicated. And even in France today, the anti-Semitism is how it could possibly be after whatever number you're willing to acknowledge. 6 million is the general one. If you want to cut if you want to cut a couple 100,000 off one way or the other, you're welcome to do it. But the point of the matter is how people can be like that in a country like France today is just after people were transported in the literal hundreds of thousands, and the French government did nothing back in those days to oppose the Nazi shipment of those people. It's just frightening to think that that can start up again. You know, there's no one left in Poland that it can happen to. Basically, it's just when I went to Poland some years back, people looked at me like I was from outer space, like I was from Mars. And that was the biggest Jewish community, over 3 million people. Anyway, so there is, you know, what I'm trying to say is that in Israel, like it or not, it may be wiped off the map in the nuclear holocaust that may be on the way because of countries like Iran and so on who are pairing these things as quickly as they possibly can. I would think, I don't know if Israel is really their target or it's just a good propaganda tool to work people up into a frenzy and keep the thing going. Or if the real target is America or Western civilization, generally speaking. But it's great to keep talking about the eradication of Israel and the annihilation of the Jews and the eradication of Tel Aviv and so on. And it gets a lot of emotional lift from the so-called streets in these various countries, and they get a lot of political clout in a pseudo-democratic society where there is no real rule of law, just iconoclasts and people who pander to the crowd. I mean, that's what Hitler was after World War I. You can't have a democracy if you don't have institutions. In these countries, Germany didn't have any institutions yet. So it's no good just to inflict a democracy without the institutions that go along with it that people honor and care about. Look at Russia now. Putin is turning right back into the secret police state again. Only now it's just a gang of thugs who kill journalists when they feel like it, take people's property, throw them into the gulag again, take $20 billion, $30 billion, $40 billion worth of property, divide it up amongst the party members as spoil, and these guys go rot out in Siberia someplace. That's what's going on in Russia now, and the U.S. government puts a pretty face on it, talks of getting Russian cooperation. They ain't getting Russian cooperation for anything, unless they feel like it and it's in their interests. Only Russian cooperation you're going to get is if they feel threatened and endangered by some of the things they see happening, but in the meantime, they're just going to try to, well, I don't have the right language, but muck things up, if you want to call it that. That's all that they're really interested in. Chinese situation is a bit different, because the Chinese, as we said, I think sometime in a previous class, have an economic interest in America. They're selling things to America, whereas the Russians aren't. The Russians have nothing to sell to America. They're selling fuel to Europe, so they have a leverage there on Europe, but they're not selling anything to America. And the Chinese are buying things from America and selling things to America. So they're not interested in the collapse of this country. Not in the short term, that's for sure. So I don't know whether these forces are after Israel or a wider thing, and they just use the Israel thing because it's easier. So if Israel is able to survive, then the future of the Jewish people, or whatever you want to call this entity of civilization, will depend on what goes on there. And so you can study the things that we're going to study here and see exactly the struggles going on today in Israel at the present moment, right out of these arguments back in the 19th century and 20th century. And it's all an intellectual thing. Once you understand the intellectual flow, you can just put people in the intellectual flow like almost pebbles in a stream or pieces of checkers on a table. And okay, the look's different, the time is different, but the flow, you see where it's flowing from. So we're going to do that for the rest of the class. But before we do, let's look at something of what triggered it. We have some really good excerpts in here. First, we have this chapter C, the new anti-Semitism, which is, I think, has a very nice anti-Semitic text from 1879. So you say, anti-Semitic text already in 1879? Yeah, it's from a writer or a politician or spokesman called Heinrich von Treitschke. And I'm using it because it's in this book and it's available to all of us, so we can see it. And he published this, this essay in fairly well-known or well-regarded German newspaper of the time. And somewhere around this time too, not long afterwards, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion also appeared. And we can talk about that presently. But let's look at von Treitschke's little excerpt here. Among the symptoms of a great change in mood in the German nation, page 80, none appear so strange as the violent movement against the Jews. So you think this fellow is going to be, oh, we do have Protocols of the Elders of Zion right after that. So you think this fellow is going to be sympathetic here. Until a few months ago, the notorious reverse hep-hep call was still dominant in Germany. Now, I don't like to give these things currency, because if you've never heard them, you're better off not having heard them. But in Europe, they would walk behind Jews, I guess Jews who stood out, probably religious Jews with beards, or Hasidim, or different people like that, who you could identify easily. And they would get hep-hep, hep-hep, hep-hep. You say, well, that means Hebrew. No, it didn't. Guess what it meant? Anyone know? Ha Yerushalayim et perduto. It was, I guess, Latin. Ha Yerushalayim et perduto. Jerusalem is lost or fallen. Hep hep. It was an acronym to sort of laugh at them for that. And this is 19 centuries later. This is how deep this kind of thing really is. This is really frightening. So this guy seems like he's against this. This was still dominant in Germany. You know, people could say the worst things they wanted. However, now he gets to his point. You know, it sounds like he's going to say, "Oh, this is terrible." He says, "But if somebody dared speak in just in moderate terms about some undeniable weakness of the Jewish character, he was immediately branded a barbarian and a religious persecutor by nearly all the newspapers." So here, look, everyone has weaknesses, and no one is saying that one shouldn't acknowledge or be willing to point out weaknesses in character. There's hardly anybody who doesn't have weaknesses, but to stigmatize a whole people begins to be a bit overly much, as Marx did in World Without Jews. And this sounds to me like, this is the way Patrick Buchanan would talk on television. He's very much in this mindset, strangely enough. He's someone whom I abhor listening to, because I know what he's about, I know what he's aiming at, I know where he's coming from. You know, he may have some respectable conservative views and things like that, but on this subject, I know exactly what it's about. and where it's always going, and it's like that. No, we're not allowed to say these things, but why not? We can say these things. And so then he goes on to pour out a certain amount of poisonous, rhetoric that is inflammatory often. Fortunately, he's gone too far, and most people don't listen to him. But there are areas of the population that find this entertaining anyway, if nothing less. But it isn't gone. This isn't gone. It's still there among some. He was immediately branded. That's how that person whom I just mentioned would talk. I'm sure his colleague Mel Gibson would talk the same way about, oh, why can't I talk about these things? To free. We're allowed to speak honestly and openly about these things and so on. Yes, as long as it's not incendiary, as long as you're not, taking advantage of a subject that has created impalpable suffering in the past and led to mass murder. It's like crying, fire in a crowded room or something. Today we have already come to the point. This is 1870s, you see, where the majority of the Breslau voters, obviously not in wild excitement with quiet deliberation, conspired not to elect a Jew to the Diet under any circumstances. Now, finally, we don't have to elect Jews. So the Jews had made quite a few inroads into Germany, even by the 1870s. So the extent that 100 years after, that's why these kind of writings are so illustrative. Mendelssohn, people are saying, well, they've gotten too deep into our society. And of course, this is Hitler 50, 80 years later, is exactly what he's about. Anti-Semitic societies are formed. The Jewish question, see, the Jewish question. That's what Hitler was talking about. The final solution to the what? To the Jewish question. This is 1870s. We're talking about Hitler, the Wannsee Conference in 1940s. That's almost 70 years later. A flood of anti-Semitic pamphlets appear. There's only too much of dirt and brutality in these doings. It's impossible to express one's disgust when one notices that some of these incendiary pamphlets obviously come from Jewish pens, and that is true. Some converts and others who were embittered and so on, people like Marx and others were as vicious as anyone else. It was well known that since Pfefferkorn, and these are two we've never even heard of, but he knows about them, and Eisenman, there were always many former Jews among the most fanatical Jew baiters. Jew baiting is really, that's what it was called, Jew baiting, and that's what our filmmaker friend does. It's baiting, it's called Jew baiting. It has an old and honorific or horrific history. And he knows he's doing it. He knows he's doing it, and he enjoys it, he likes it. And the people who follow him don't know that's what he's doing, but he knows, and his father knows that's what he's doing. And the Passion movie, no one's got anything against Passion movies per se, but he knows this is a revival of the Obermmergau Passion play that was outlawed because of how the Nazis took advantage of it to encourage their virulent anti-Semitic invective. The Obermmergau Passion play was just a play in a town. He put it in a movie for the same purpose. He knows what he's doing. But people who watch it are inspired by the things that move them, and that's fair enough. But they don't know what they're being, how they're being manipulated any more than the people who would go to a Wagnerian opera in 19th century Germany would know what was going on. And even the people who were Wandervogel people. Wandervogel people are people who were into the later Hosen and hiking and doing all this stuff. They didn't know they were walking right into the Hitler Youth movement. They didn't know that. They didn't understand what was going to be done with these things. I mean, you see the same thing happening in Lebanon today. When you see them marching in the streets with their signs and their banners and their symbols, all that's taken right out of Nazi paraphernalia, Nazi regalia, just put a different symbolism and get them all marching. People love to watch marching humans for some unknown reason. I don't understand why. Okay, we have bands too in America, but I don't think we get so worked up and thrilled by seeing them in the street, maybe at a football field or something, because it's a sort of a fun sport type of thing, but not on the streets politically. Stormtroopers, and that's what you're getting. You're getting Shiite stormtroopers on the streets of Lebanon and Iran. And they know where they're taking their ideology from. They're just transforming it slightly. Okay, so these outbreaks of deep, long-expressed anger really only are these only a momentary outburst as hollow and irrational as the Teutonic anti-Semitism of 1819? There was obviously earlier outbreaks. It'd be a good topic for a paper, this, because I don't know anything about it. You guys look for papers. If you really want to do a paper, he's already giving you some pointers here. So this has been going on for quite a while. If the English and the French talk with some disdain of the German prejudice against Jews, we must reply to them, you don't know as you live in happier circumstances. And what's his point going to be? You're not inundated. That's what his point is. You know, that's what he means by happy. It's like the people who make a fuss about immigration from south of the border here. You know, they say to the others that don't care about the question, oh, you don't know what's happening. You know, all the people on the TV that beat the drum on that particular issue. Again, I don't mean to be, I'm not a political pundit, but I would say that anyone who's willing to serve in the U.S. Army and sacrifice themselves for the country and the Constitution, I don't care where they come from. You know, that's they show their loyalty and patriotism. So many native-born Americans who aren't willing, and so there are many people from south of the border who, in fact, are willing, because they know more than a lot what's at stake. Because they come from countries where they know what it's like to have, well, look what's happening in Oaxaca today, and you'll have a good example of what I'm talking about. If you're not familiar with what's going on in Oaxaca, southern Mexico, read the newspapers about that. Anyway, so there's a lot of people who fight for the United States from these civilizations, and I have all the utmost admiration. They do more than I would have even done. The number of Jews in Western Europe is so small they cannot have noticeable influence upon the morality of the nations. But our country is invaded year after year by multitudes of assiduous, pants-selling youths from the inexhaustible cradle of Poland. There you go. There it is. There it is. 1870s. That's why I like to read these things. I hope you find it not unvaluable. This is the program of 1940, 1930s. Dracht nach Osten, the drive to the east. Hitler knew that in getting control of Poland and these other places, he would get control of what this person is speaking here about, the inexhaustible cradle of Poland, whose children and grandchildren are the future rulers of Germany's stock exchanges and press. So there it is, and that's what the seeds are right there. Now it's going to be people like Herzl 20 years later who are going to say, enough. We know what these things are about, and we know what these other dreamers don't know. The Mendelssohn people all converted and tried to disappear, fair enough. But all the rest who didn't, we know what's in store. We know what is coming. Fortunately, America has never had this problem, not for Jews, Asians, Afro-Americans. Sure, Afro-Americans have the slavery issue for sure, and the poor aftermath of the Civil War, after the assassination of Lincoln and the inability of the government to follow through. Not so different, by the way, what's happening in Iraq today, the inability of the government to follow through, allowing, armed bands of thugs to operate and kill and lynch and do that kind of stuff, and former Confederate soldiers who were just given free rein when the Union Army pulled out, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, they didn't follow through, so there is a justified complaint there. But with all that, America is not in the business of annihilating its ethnic groups. It really hasn't. It did this terrible injustice of the Japanese situation in the beginning of World War II. That, in fact, was mostly on the Pacific coast anyway because of the security concerns that were overwrought by the people who were in charge of things. But there's terrible injustice to have done that, and the Japanese put that right in their own noble behavior in that situation. But again, even there, I mean, though there were quasi-concentration camps, which is a blot on America, there were, which Reagan tried to heal through some financial consideration. I don't think that's sufficient, but that's, at least he made the gesture. That is not mass liquidation. That's not mass liquidation. America is not in the business, as far as I know, with any race of mass liquidation. It treats people harshly, and it makes them stand up on their own feet and fight for their rights and things. But it doesn't liquidate, thank God. Hopefully it never will. So, you know, but here we're getting the incendiary things that lead to liquidation in these kinds of tracts. And I haven't read the 1820s tracts, but I really think it's really good that he, and this fellow is trying to appear very reasonable, you see. This immigration grows visibly in numbers, and the question becomes more and more serious how this alien nation can be assimilated. The Jews of Western and Southern European countries belong mostly to the Spanish branch. See, he knows his stuff, the Sephardi branch, who looks back on a comparatively proud history and which always adjusted comparatively easily to the Western way of life. So he acknowledges that Italy and the Balkans, the assimilation was fairly widespread. In fact, the great majority of them have become good Frenchmen, Englishmen, Italians. This is Sephardi Jews, like I told you, as far as can be expected from people of such pure blood and such a distinct peculiarity. We Germans, however, have to deal with Jews of the Polish branch, which bears the deep scars of centuries of Christian tyranny. According to the experience, they are comparably more alien to the European, especially the German national character. What we have to demand from our Jewish fellow citizens is simple. They become Germans. Regard them simply and justly as Germans, without prejudice to their faith and their old sacred past, which all of us hold in reverence. We do not want an era of German-Jewish mixed culture to follow after 1,000 years of German civilization. Well, this is the other side of the coin. This is what the people who were assimilating as fast as they could were facing. And some of his demands were not on the overt side outlandish. Because he still wants them to become Germans. It's not like Hitler, who doesn't even want to allow them to become Germans. But he has a glorified view of what a German is. I don't know where he got this exalted view of Germans. The country had hardly become a country in the 1870s. I mean, where its glorified past is, except for a military early history of serving in Roman armies as mercenaries, I don't know. At the same time, it cannot be denied there are numerous and powerful groups among our Jews who definitely do not have goodwill, have the goodwill to become simply Germans. So he takes it back here. It's painful enough to talk about these things. Even conciliatory words are easily misunderstood. I think, however, some of my Jewish friends will admit with deep regret that recently a dangerous spirit of arrogance has arisen in Jewish circles, and the influence of Jewry upon our national life, which in former times was often beneficial, has recently often been harmful. I refer to the reader of the History of the Jews by Gretz. What a fanatical fury against the arch-enemy Christianity! What deadly hatred just of the purest and most powerful opponents of German character, from Luther to Goethe to Fichte. He's talking about his history that this Gretz wrote, which is a very mild history. I don't know what he's all worked up about. And what hollow, offensive self-glorification. Well, he's really losing it. Again, we have people today who are just like this. And I've already mentioned a few. I won't labor that point. It's kind of frightening. Fortunately, no one pays much attention to them. some of them are living in Australia, and they would maybe best stay there. In many thousands of German villages, we have the Jewish usurer. Among the leading names of art and science, there are not many Jews. Well, that's not the case anymore. Art and science is, you know, like overwhelmed with Jews, unfortunately or fortunately, whatever you think of that. Anyway, he goes on like that, and I hope you've read this. The greatest danger, however, is the unjust influence of the Jews in the press, you know, the press lords. And that's always been a big complaint of people who are, for lack of a better word, what we would call anti-Semites. The little man is firmly convinced that now the Jews write everything in the newspapers. And you see, you hear in America often, oh, the Jews control the press. Oh, the Jews control business. Oh, the Jews control politics. You hear that, you know, on the streets, even in America. I don't think America's bad in that regard. I honestly think that, even though I do hear this, whatever you mean by white, and I don't even think it's a uniform entity in any way, but what we call non-ethnic America would be better, is now a minority almost anyway. The ethnic groups in America are on the verge of outnumbering the so-called whatever a white is. I mean, if a Jew is considered a white, I think lots of whites wouldn't assent to that and so on. So I don't know what white means, but what used to be the dominant culture. So now that dominant culture, even if there are people speaking like that in that dominant culture world, are no longer the dominant culture because this country is getting so multi-ethnic that there's no way to know what is the dominant culture. So that's an interesting phenomenon. I'm not praising or criticizing, I'm just observing. So I think America is different, but you do hear these things. I just think it's less dangerous in this country because of the factors that I just told you about. And I'm sure how many have heard that kind of thing. Don't raise your hands, but I'm sure you've heard that kind of thing. Some people, when they come up to me and don't know my background, say those things to me. Almost every, and you know, I hate to use this person as an example, but he wasn't as bad as people make him out to be. Mayor Kahana, who was killed by an Arab terrorist in Brooklyn, he had this Jewish Defense League, and you know, he was just trying to make Jews stand up. I don't think he was really a racist. I met him several times. He was just not a very capable political person. But anyway, he used to tell his crowds of people in a rabble-rousing way, just go into a bar if you want to hear what Americans think about Jews. Fortunately, most of us don't inhabit bars, but that's what he said, just go into a bar. And unfortunately, the kind of bars that used to exist in America, I don't think there are so many anymore, because those bars, the seedy type American bar has disappeared. To some extent, now you have sports bars. So these are different kind of, don't think your sports bar is where this is happening. This is where, we're talking about where people really go to drink. We're not talking about where people go to watch a sports event and, you know, and cheer for their team or something like that. But he used to say that. He used to say, you know, I heard him say it, you know, just go into a bar if you want to hear what people really think. Any case, this man goes on, so he's very upset. You can't criticize Christianity as far as he's concerned, or anything Christian, or anything German. That's just being un-German. The movement is so deep and strong, the bottom of page 83. Oh, you know, he then goes on. Our newspapers owe much to Jewish talent. The acuteness and nimble quickness of the Jewish mind found the arena of the press always a congenial field. But here, too, the effect is double-edged, blah, 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 blah. Further down, the movement is deep and strong. Few jokes about the words of wisdom from the mouths of Christian socialist soapbox orators will not be sufficient to suppress it. Even in the best educated circles among men who would reject with horror any thought of Christian fanaticism or natural arrogance, we hear today the cry as from one mouth, the Jews are our misfortune. So he's saying this is everywhere. There can be no talk among the intelligent of an abolition or even a limitation of emancipation. This is already gone too far forward at the bottom of the page. Ours is a young nation, that's for sure. And we saw what finally happened. Our country still lacks national style. You see, it couldn't happen in England. Regardless of the snobism, maybe there is racism in England, very, very deep, but the traditions of the English character behavior are so old and so deeply embedded. Even Hitler admired the English, which is why he really didn't want to conquer them. He wanted to make a deal with them. They're going to fight the Russians. That's why he sent Rudolf Hess in a plane there to try to cut a deal with them. That's why he let the British troops escape from Dunkirk. He could have annihilated the British troops on the beach of Dunkirk. He had an innate awe of British society and British manners and British snobism. If you look at old movies in America, you'll see America was dominated by that too. All the actors are British. If you look at movies from the 30s and the 40s and so on, and you know, I mean, it's like everyone's putting on a British accent. I don't recognize America anymore in the movies because when I was young, everyone spoke with a British accent in the movies. And if you didn't have one, you tried to put one on, like me. You know, I mean, this was just normal. I have a British wife, so she influences me too. But you know, you may say, listen to Eisenman's phony accent. Yeah, because that was just normal for the East Coast. If you had any intellectual pretensions, that's the way you spoke. But here in the heartland, in the middle America, on the West Coast as well, that's all evaporated. People can't even pronounce nuclear. The president has to say nuclear. I think he does it as a joke now because he knows how to pronounce it. But there are other words that people are unable to pronounce, you know, in the normal English manner, and that is on the highest levels of society now. So things have changed. So he's saying, you know, you see, we have a different situation than you people in England and France, and that is true, but not the way he's saying it. They would never end up doing this. You said the French, you said, did it? No, they let the Germans do it there for them. They didn't do it, they just cooperated. And a lot of French resisted. But the government, the French government, the Pétain Vichy government cooperated, collaborated, if you want to call it that, to save whatever it is they were trying to save. Our country still lacks national style, instinctive pride, affirmative of individuality, and that's what the English did and still to some extent have. That's the reason why we're defenseless against alien manners. We're in the process of acquiring these qualities, yes, through Richard Wagner and his crazy operas, which is why personally I will not go to a Richard Wagner opera no matter how enticing they are, because that's what he's trying to create, a German mythology in those operas, and succeeded actually. And there is beautiful music in the Wagnerian, you know, pantheon, but the total effect is horrific, what he's after. And again, the agenda is the problem, not the music. In some places there are Jewish societies against usury, which are doing much good. There are workmen tells you, yeah, now everyone is a usurer because that's what's interest. That's what banks do when they charge interest. The only way out, therefore, is for our Jewish fellow citizens to make up their minds without reservation to be Germans, as many of them have done already long ago, as Mendelssohn's children did, and so on, to their advantage and ours. There will never be a complete solution. See, he's talking about a solution. He's talking about a solution. And that's what the fascists and others came, when they had the power over the European continent, which they had to put immediately into operation. They didn't wait a minute. They followed the German armies. They were right behind them. And they called it the final solution. And they meant it. And he is just, you know, sounding off here. There's always been an abyss between Europeans and Semites since the time when Tacitus complained about the odium generis humanity. There would always be Jews who are nothing else but German-speaking Orientals, and so on and so on. This is a great essay to read. I do think it's a mixture of, I mean, the guy has a lot of information. On the other hand, he's totally insane with his fanaticism. And it's frightening because that's underneath the surface there. And you can bring it out, or you can, you know, rise above it in more elegant issues. All right, we'll take a break now. We're going to, after the break, look at the Dreyfus affair. I guess we should look at the Protocol of the Elders of Zion, too. I don't know if I have time for that. There's some good excerpts in this book here to see. No hard feelings about that, just a taught me to concentrate.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. I took your apology.